Well, I'm impressed. I'm really impressed this morning with the head count. First of all, Ray told me not once, not twice, but 3 times to not be boring and to throw some humor and levity into this deal, so I'm going to try and do that. Security sometimes, I mean, how do you make cybersecurity funny? It's just a difficult thing to do, but we'll try. So we try and have fun where I work, and hopefully you do the same. So we will have some of that in our presentation this morning. But first of all, I was wrong, Ray. I think I've served on your board almost from the very beginning when you came up with this concept, which, by the way, was a great idea. And I thought that was a great idea from day one. I was wrong about the conference. My thought was, gee whiz, do we really need another security conference? We do what, Anthony, 42? We do 42 a year. Now, not all of those are security, some are pro AV, but we do 42. Did we need 43? So liking and respecting Ray, I kind of kept my mouth shut and didn't throw a wet blanket on his idea. But I tell you what, this is really impressive. This is the 2nd year. These are difficult to put on. And to pull it off with this type of borderline military precision, I'm just really impressed. So really, great job. And don't listen to me, I'm wrong a lot, Ray. Yeah. So I was wrong on the event, but I was right on you, so we were close. I'm going to do the bios, and not, I want to emphasize this, and not in order of importance. Not in alphabetical order, and I don't know who jumbled this up, but this is the way it was given to me. So not in order of importance, I'll start with Andrew.
Thank you. Definitely bottom of the pack. Bottom of the pile.
No, Andrew's great.
And they brought up here.
And the great thing is he also represents, of course, we have consultants and integrators up here. And we have a giant integrator, right? And one of the largest in the world. And we also have an entrepreneurial, smaller integrator. So I think it'll be nice to see the dynamics between the two. You don't want to load things up with all giants or all small guys. So a little bit about Andrew. Started his career in computer and electronics field, 1982, COBOL, Fortran, assembler programming language. He continued in his career as a missile weapons technician in the United States Navy and earned, I didn't know this one, earned a combat, let's see, I don't have a pop filter, but I'll put it down a little bit. And earned a combat action ribbon in the Persian Gulf during Operation Praying Mantis in April of 1988. After the Navy, he joined the electronic security industry in 1994, and he co-founded with his very wonderful wife and the PSA board member, Christine, Integrated Security Technologies, which is in Honolulu. Andrew is also the chairman of the PSA Cybersecurity Committee, which is almost a full-time job these days.
Thanks, Bill.
Almost a full-time job. And by the way, it's uncompensated.
It doesn't get paid.
It doesn't get paid.
Talk about that.
And he's also a member of the Security Industry Association Cybersecurity Committee Council. He also participates in the UL Laboratory for Cybersecurity Standards Technical Panel. And I could go on and on. But Andrew, you've been a blessing for our group and I think the industry in general. Next. If there's anyone, I started in '79, so that makes it, what, 39 years doing this? Yeah, it's a long, basically right out of college. But Jim has me beat. He said something at breakfast this morning, which I don't believe, but I'm going to repeat it anyway. And that is that your daddy had you on the bench at 3?
Yep.
Yeah, Brian Colon was trying to win that award.
But he meant on the bench sleeping.
And you said your daddy had you started at 7. So then, Jim Henry had to one up you. Said, "Well, I was 3."
Yeah. But you were just sleeping, right? I
was 3. Okay. Jim is the executive vice president of corporate development for Securitas. I'm not going to read this word for word. Jim has basically been around for a long, long time. Has a unique, in my opinion, a unique perspective because not only is he a technically oriented gentleman. If I'm not mistaken, you're an electrical engineer by formal education, but also understands the dynamics in the channel. And so often, extremely technical people don't understand the dynamics in the channel in the business. Jim understands both, which makes him a unique bird. I originally ran across Jim. He was the CEO of HPE, which was his dad's company, which actually went public at one time. That company, Jim ran that as CEO, built a heck of a company. Then that company was sold yet to another public company, Kratos Defense, And Jim was there for, gosh, what?
7 years.
7 years at Kratos Defense. And then recently, Kratos spun the security systems integration business off to Securitas. And so Jim is now one of the leaders of that group. Now let's get to the important people in our audience, which is the consultants. I mean, everybody knows security by design, and if you don't, and that's integrators included, by the way, and if you don't, then you haven't been paying attention, right? You just haven't been paying attention. So Lauren and Ed are famous in our niche, and go back. Lauren, I didn't know about the CPP credits, by the way, so thank you for mentioning that. I'm always desperate to find those credits at the last minute, I might add, so that's good news. Lauren is a CEO, Security by Design, a consulting firm, we all know, in Northern California, been active in the security industry for over 40 years. Earned her CPP in 1986. Her focuses on design, sophisticated systems, architecture, and electronic stand-up. I mean, just it's a gold-plated resume. It's a gold-plated resume, and also serves on Ray's board. So thank you for helping us out here. Terry Harless is a senior physical security specialist at Burns & McDonnell with more than 18 years experience in electronic security systems design, construction administration, and commissioning. He has extensive experience performing security design in the corrections, sports facility, and electronic utilities market. So Terry, thank you. Burns McDonnell, very well respected. I mean, let's be honest here. The relationship between the integrator community and the consulting community is not always great. Phil Aronson had an interesting comment on the boat the other night. He said, does it need to be? Does it need to be great? Should it not just be professional and respectful both ways? Does it need to be great? Do we need to be big buddies? So I thought that was a very interesting, some insight from Phil. And having been an integrator for 20 years, I can tell you, in the majority of the job that I did, consultants were involved. I would say 80%. A comment was made that really surprised me, guys, about the integrator, about the consultants at one of the sessions yesterday, and that was, I'm trying to think who made it, that only 5 to 10% of the integrated systems are, that surprised me. I guess I have a myopic view because 80% of what I did, which is all heavy industry, oil and gas, the consultants were involved. So I personally, I think you guys should be involved in more. That's my perspective. I'm going to give you some reasons why, and then we're going to get into a host of questions, some of which came from the panel, some of which came from Ray. But I think everybody would agree. I mean, there's a lot of finger pointing here. I mean, I hear it, right? I hear it. I also hear, by the way, from the manufacturers calling me and saying, hey, Bill, man, this guy in Make-up a City, this guy in Detroit really sucks. You know, I have great stuff and it works all the time, and he deploys it incorrectly, and he really sucks. Why is he a PSA member? That type. I hear that as well. So there's plenty of finger pointing between the consultants and the integrators and the manufacturers and the end users. Everybody's blaming everybody. Somebody said that was normal. It's unfortunate, but maybe it is. So I mean, really, who's responsible for this? Right? I think this came from Security by Design. Maybe it was something you cleaned up. I'm sure. I mean, seriously, who is responsible for something like this? Who do you blame?
That's the customer who did his own work. Walked into a bunch of those.
So,
I just wanted to say one thing. As an integrator, I've got obviously a lot of integrator friends, frenemies, co-opetition. Got not so many consultants in Honolulu. I don't know why you guys don't want to work in Honolulu. But friends nonetheless, the ones that we have in the enterprise space, commercial enterprise, and then manufacturing friends. And if we can't make you a foe by the end of this, Jim will.
So the good news is, thanks to meetings like this, we figured out who's responsible, and we did it using the latest from Carnegie Mellon, the latest, voice analytics. And there was an apology. There was an apology for this with a disguised voice from the integrator who actually is responsible. So we know who is responsible for this. Wow.
Phil, that's just because he had to leave early, so he's not here to defend himself.
Bill Aronson was
That is not
responsible.
Wow.
No, Bill was going to be on this panel.
Wow.
This is what happens. This is what happens when you miss a panel.
Wow. That's brutal.
This is what. There's not many people you can do that to.
Phil would not let that work go.
Yeah,
I got to defend him a little bit here.
Everybody likes Phil, so you can do that. But I thought it was funny. Ray told me to do some
that
funny
is
things.
funny.
Okay, let's get serious. Let's
Okay.
get serious. Terry, let's start off with you. Do you have a contentious relationship with most integrators, some integrators, rarely, or is it la-la land where you just get along great with the integrator?
Nice.
So I would say initially, if I'm working for an integrator the first time, normally it is a very contentious relationship. And after that first job or first interaction, typically I'll end up working with them because we're all together. We want the project to work successfully, and the only way we can do that is if we work together. So there's been many times where I've had, major issues with integrators, and it's, we just get together, sit down, work it out, and I would say by the end of the first project, second project, we become friends. And I mean, we've even went so far as hiring an integrator on the Burns and McDonnell on our team. So,
Lorna, your thoughts on? Just be truthful here. There's only 3 integrators here, so.
They all up here?
I would say the majority of our projects, we have good integrators and we have a good relationship, but we almost always have some little piece of a project that's just not done up to snuff. And lots of times it seems like it's a training issue for the contractor. They tend to rely on guys having OTJ training instead of a formal training program. And it's not that the installer wants to do a poor job, he just doesn't know better. They cut the grounding wires off, and I even had one integrator installer say that he always cut the grounds off because he'd had problems on a project that had any grounding. So it's those kinds of things. We recently had spec'd a job that required domain controllers. We were using Active Directory to maintain the universal passwords across the different systems, and the contractor didn't know what that was, so they provided the servers and they put them in the rack, but they didn't connect them or program them because they didn't know what they were and wouldn't ask. So those are the kinds of problems that we have with contractors. And this is one of our top installation contractors in our area, and so it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, let me go before Jim does, because he'll be on this a while, I hope. Just briefly, so I've got specifically a couple of my enterprises that use a consultant. So the guy's awesome, and his standards are very high. I call that a training opportunity. So I send guys out there that need to be training, that need to be polished, that need to be looked after, and I let them look after them. But I tell him that ahead of time. He's like, can you quit sending me your new guys? Because he knows better. He knows our other guys already because he's worked out there for years. So for sure, I think the inexperienced thing is a good, that the problems that we have when we're being held to the standards that we need to be held to, we need those pointed out. So always do that work as a consultant. Please don't just think because you're a great contractor who's always done a good job. Now has he gone berserk and lost his mind? He's terrible. He just sent you his new guys, and they just need to be held to that standard and understand it. So I appreciate the work that you do when you show up and hold the standard high. And just understand you may have his new guys because you probably made him successful and he's busy, and so you got the new guys this time. And we all have to watch them. We can't be on every job all the time, right? So it's a piece of the business. I think your eyes keen to what you see at inexperience it happens.
So what percentage of your projects is there Securitas? I think it was Ben that made that comment, if I'm not mistaken, which really surprised me. Yeah. What percent of your projects security consultants?
So I have a healthcare facility they always do their work through a consultant. The local group in Hawaii doesn't want to pay for him. They always want to go around him to save money. And then so small stuff we'll install to his standards because we know what they are. So that's an interesting thing. So for us, that number would resonate. Also, our utility company, Hawaiian Electric, does. So I'd say 15%, something like that. Yeah. Now, in the government space, it's supervised, right? Spay War, and you got the guys in the Army, Corps of Engineers. So you could call them the program managers, right? So, but they basically consult to the DoD. So it's a similar sort of set of standards there, and similar scrutiny.
Yeah. Both questions the same, Jim. Number of consultants and then the relationship deal.
Well, I don't know whether it's my sadomasochistic pedigree or whatever, but, I've been drawn to large enterprise projects, through my whole career, through my dad's original affiliation with Motorola back in the 50s and 60s, and that brought us into a lot of enterprise accounts and public agencies and whatnot. So most of the jobs that we do involve security consultants, GCs, all the big stakeholders, in the industry. And absolutely positively, every job that goes right, it's because of communications. Every job that goes wrong is because of communications. So, as you would expect, I will take full advantage of it being an election day to make an analogy.
Is this going to involve Hillary?
The spec. No, I'm not going to go there. You're going to be surprised at how sanitized I'm going to make this. But the spec is the Constitution.
Yep.
Right? The owners are the executive branch of our government, and the GCs are the judicial. Us lowly integrators, we're the military. We're the ones that go out there and do this shit. But
Glad he didn't say we're the legislators.
We on these large.
He'll probably get to that in a minute.
All right, that's good. But when we respect the spec as the Constitution and don't allow the executive branch to give executive orders to change it, and the judicial branch to make subjective interpretations, right? Keep the consultants as that legislative branch. It can be changed, but they got to be the ones that change it, and they got to be party to that. And that way we have surety. We understand what the mission is. We don't have the ambiguity that we have to throw all sorts of risk dollars at because there's going to be all this magic line iteming out and, and injecting or revoking of elements of it. And the best way to have a project go crazy cost-wise is, lack of predictability, lack of surety. So, we welcome a very rigorous spec, a very demanding spec, but it needs to be defended during the BAFO process, not to bring in, all the ragamuffins and whatnot that are going to, throw a price that's 30% under just because they're going to electively, eliminate some of these requirements. It's, I think it really begins with that. And you can survive these large projects if everybody has that discipline, if the consultants, the manufacturers, and the, and the integrators, we always looked at having a more prejudicial voice, but I really do think the consultants and the manufacturers have the ability to convince the owner that this is not a spectator sport. You need to be part of this process, and you need to keep the consultant engaged through the entire project because they are the legislature, and they're the only ones that can change the statement of work that they have, and that's the only way to not have the consultants come in after they've been excused for a while because they don't want to pay you for the whole program, and they come in and say, what the hell happened to my job? The picture that Bill had up there. And inevitably, there's the integrator standing there with the screwdrivers in his hand, and he's the guilty party.
True.
So before we get into dirty words like design bill for integrators, I'll tell you a funny story. It's funny because it's true. It's really pathetic, but it's true. Is Marcus Batten in the room by any chance? Marcus isn't here? Oh, there. Oh, okay, he is here. Yeah. So Marcus was out there, right, with his loud voice telling this story to people that I don't necessarily tell because it's a little bit embarrassing. But because Marcus told that story, I'm going to tell a story of Marcus real quick. It's got nothing to do with security, but it's just funny. And Marcus has been in the security business for a long time. But have you ever heard that old expression like eat crow? Yeah. Well, Marcus, actually, they would barbecue and eat crows. Marcus, is that true or false?
True.
It's true.
It's true.
Marcus actually eats crows. So When you hear his stories on me, do not pay any attention, but I thought that was a hilarious story. They would actually shoot them when they were little kids and put them on the pit and grill them up. So my story, design, build.
Big crows.
So when I was building my company a long time ago, I was very proud of the fact that we landed some large industrial type accounts. I thought that was the pinnacle of what you're supposed to do when you're in our business, right? I didn't want to do C-stores. So we worked for about a year, and I don't know how familiar you are with the Deep South, but we landed the Stennis Space Center, which is in Mississippi. And it's a large facility that employs a lot of people, named after the famous U.S. Senator, John Stennis. And I was really, really proud of that. In addition, I was doubly proud because I helped write the spec. And yeah, right, that's laughable. Along with our technical director, who was a graduate engineer from the University of Michigan. And we installed the first, this is a long time ago, the first color video surveillance system back in the days when we called it CCTV. The first one, to my knowledge, in the whole southern part of the United States. I was real proud of that. And it was a good-sized job. It was for where they were building the small rocket testing facility, whatever. Job went in, and once again, it was my suggestion that we could save some money by eliminating you guys, because we knew so much, right? And we were so good at this, and I had my own engineer on staff. This is a true story. The story Marcus is telling out in the hallway. We put the system in, and the fellow who was in charge, nice fellow, called up and said, well, the resolution is excellent. I'm very pleased with that, but I'm real disappointed with the color, and I'd like you to come out here and sit down with me. And I said, well, that's not good, you know. I talked to the technician. The technician said, man, Bill, I don't know what's up. The pictures are great. I don't know what this guy's complaining about. So I went out there, and he took me in. He was nice and cordial. He took me in. He said, well, what do you think about this? And I looked and I went, oh, God, you know, it's black and white, you know. And I found that we deployed a color video surveillance system, color cameras, and black and white monitors.
Whoops.
Yeah, we actually did that.
You've all done it once.
Yeah, we actually did that. I developed this incredible respect for consultants who were paid attention to detail. And to make matters worse, by the way, the color monitors that I had to eat didn't fit into the rack. So not only did I have to eat that, I had to eat a whole new rack. So anyway, I thought it was a funny story. Let's get a little bit serious. Look, are the integrators who have that idea, and there are some, let's just be frank. We have a lot of integrators who, they call themselves a design build shop. That's just a fact, you know that. That can't be good for your business. But I mean, let's talk about, first of all, how the consultants feel about an integrator who has the capability, or thinks he has the capability, to design based upon what the end user tells him, and then basically eliminate the need for a professional certified security consultant. You want to start, Lauren?
Sure. We've faced a number of those over the years. Many of you probably know Dennis Rayfield, and he used to have Omega, and every now and then he would launch off and do his own design build system, and then he'd call us up and say, I'm never going to do that again. And then about 6 months later, he'd call us and go, I did another design build, and I'm not going to do that again. And we've had a number of integrators over the years who bid on the project and then proceeded to redesign without knowing all of the information that we had collected over the months prior to putting out the bid. And of course, the projects went south relatively quickly. They could save the client money, but what they didn't realize is they were not meeting the client's objectives. That said, there are also a lot of integrators out there who do a great job of design build, and obviously, as you heard earlier, they have the majority of the work, 90% or more of the design work that's out there. But we've had some successes, and we've had some real disasters.
Terry?
So this is something Jim and I talked about yesterday, actually, and I think there's a lot of small projects, maybe even in the government side that are pretty prescriptive, that you shall put a camera here, you should put a card reader here, and all that kind of stuff. That it might be even a little difficult for us to kind of make money on. So it's probably a pretty good idea to have the integrator do some of that work. Larger projects, enterprise projects, we've come across some similar to Lauren where we've had to come in after the fact and clean it up because the integrator used cameras off the shelf that they haven't been able to get rid of, or different products that have been laying around their shop for whatever because they can't do anything with them. And then the other thing is we work with a lot of integrators that are direct to the client. So they do the design build to the client. And then when they get on our project, it's like pulling teeth because they're used to their way of doing it. They bid on the projects their way of doing it. They don't look at the specs. And we have a lot of issues with them, after the fact, once they installed it, or even during the shop drawing phase, it gets to be pretty much of a nightmare. But for the most part, there are some good integrators out there that do design build. We actually have started working with some integrators during the design process. We'll do the first 15, 20% of the project in the design phase, and they'll QA QC us. We'll hand off the rest of the project to them. We'll QA QC them. And actually, we come in as a team, and that has worked out pretty good in some of our electric utility jobs.
Just to add one thing, and that is, if any of you have gone out to a site to do maintenance, and this is really aimed at the integrators in the room, and found nothing's labeled, nothing's documented, that's the primary thing we're fighting. We're trying to end up with fully documented systems as a system designer so that our clients can maintain the system later. And I can't tell you how many times we walk in and there's just absolutely no as-built and nothing's labeled. So then you've got to test everything to try to figure out what you even have.
I don't think there's anything as successful as a design build project that is not mutually exclusive, but it is a collaboration of the consulting community and the integrator. And the first great example I've talked of, I'll never stop talking about this because it was so good. And this is 15 years ago. It's right after 9/11. DVS, Phil and Brian had a design contract there with Silverstein to raise the first building out of the World Trade Center site. And, but of course it's going through the normal procurement theater because it's a big project, so you've got Tishman Construction involved and, and all this nonsense. And the good thing that happened was that on the IT side, Cisco got a hold of this and threw them like a $10 million, estimate there for a Sonnet network that, could have run the whole MTA. And that had the owner, throw up his hands and say, what the hell are you going to do? This is ridiculous. I don't have this kind of money, blah, blah, blah. So we all sit down at the table basically to do a collaborative on this. And in that process of going through, again, the Constitution that I'm reading there, of the intent that, the DVS had for that site, a lot of it was lessons learned from 9/11. And one of the requirements was a signage system for the stairwells, and as an integrator that does not look to reinvent the wheel, I'm looking all over for this thing, and finally I call Phil up and I'm going, Phil, what did you have in mind here? I can't find this anywhere. And he says, well, it doesn't exist. He says, but we need it, those kinds of challenges, one of the sessions, talk about, constructability and what have you. Sometimes this reality occurs, but when, the wisdom and experience of the integrator and the vision of the consultant are put together in a realistic approach to come up with a way to address a true need by the end user, that was just perfection. And that project, I still look at as the highlight of my career because it just demonstrated how good things can be when you have that kind of cooperation, collaboration, the GCs don't want to hear that. That doesn't sound good, but cooperation and complementary input to realize you know, that we all have the same end goal. You know, it wasn't the ops, it wasn't the CapEx guys fighting with the OpEx guys and what have you. Everybody was at the table. The construction team, the operational team for the end user, the designer, you know, and the integrator, and we got manufacturers to cooperate, you know, with us as well, because some of the requirements that we had there, again, were just really getting into, at the point of everything moving from analog to digital at the time as well. You know, we had a lot of challenges, but it was a seamless project and an example I just love to replicate.
That's awesome.
Andrew?
I'm trying to think about the magic. So, at least as an integrator, and I get stuff that was designed like 5 years ago, for example, because government couldn't fund it, right? So that happens to us, and the design intent's the same, but the stuff that was specified isn't available or whatever. That happens. And so we're allowed to fix that stuff, and typically it's a change order process, and that can be painful with government, painful with they don't understand why and things like that. So those examples, you know, if you exclude those sort of examples, the bulk of what I think is the magic out there in the cooperative effort comes from experience, first of all. Like, so the work that we've done feeds the work that we do. So we kind of know what's going to work, and regardless of how good the spec is that I get, it goes through our system engineering group, right? They're going to try to find what's wrong before we get even in the bench test phase for these systems. So because things get missed on all ends. Whether we designed it, someone else designed it, and perhaps it was designed with something that was going to come out. We heard some manufacturers talking about, you know, I've heard people talk about keeping firmware versions up to the newest and things like that. Well, in reality, sometimes that new version is not going to work with the existing VMS version and things like that. So sometimes the specified wording, it can't be brought to reality, you know, in that current state. So, you know, we have to play in that world a little bit and sometimes smooth that or fix that. And it's really more of an approval process. So we try to get it early on and get into that RFI phase, that request for information. Hey, I see you've asked for this. Get that back to the consultant or the architect and ask these questions. When it goes back to the government, it's like sometimes a black hole. Like, you don't ever get the answer. You're done. You've walked away. You had 3 children. Oh, you get this response. Oh, you meant that door. Yeah. So, I mean, it happens in government. I'm sorry, but the commercial space, it's pretty quick, and you know, the authoritative answer oftentimes doesn't even end with the customer, right? So the consultant knows more about what the customer's idea was because he's talked with other folks than the customer themselves. So, as an integrator, you also get that whole, you know, you show up, you've done what was required, what was specified, and then the end user's there who actually doesn't know because he hasn't been told downstream in his organization why he has to use a card reader to get in this door now, you know, things like that. So, you know, it's the success is built on cooperation, but I think your first point was communication, and that's always worked well, you know. I mean, I'm on like this island. If you've seen little pictures, it's down near the Caribbean, Hawaii, on maps. And we're kind of self-reliant a lot of times for what we do. So there's a lot of expertise there, but there is also expertise that like flies in and then disappears. And so it's like, what do they mean? And you can't get them back. They'll come back for 10 grand, right? Because they want to have another 2-week holiday and things like that. So some of this stuff gets interpretive on our end, you know, as an integrator. So just keep that kind of stuff in mind. So if you're, you know, a consultant on a project, you want to be available. You want to understand it from both sides of the house. And then, you know, with cooperative projects, I think the biggest project we ever did was for Kratos. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like Jim calls me, can you do this in 100 days? It was like a $4 million project. 100 days. I got like 4 guys back then. Like, wow. I think the rest of my year equaled that project. You know, so it was like, you know. So anyway, I'm sensitive. I'm always sensitive to the conversation of specification, the conversation of proficiency, definitely the conversation about as-built. There are a lot of companies in Hawaii that don't do any of that. So like, you know, they try to handcuff that customer by not providing any information to the customer. And the customer's too stupid to ask for this information. So if you haven't worked in government or places where as-built are required, you don't know these things. And, these clients end up with a lot of money they've spent, and they really, if that guy they got a call to work on it is like $5,000 the first hour, things like that, right? So they get handcuffed really badly. So, stick to your standards, and talk about them and the why. I think the why can get lost sometimes. So that's another piece of the puzzle that you don't want to be left without.
Years ago, we worked on a big project, and at the end of it, we invited the security installers, we invited the electricals into our office, and we said, what worked, what didn't work relative to our specification. And that was a very educational session. And in those days, the common term was, we bid the holes. And so the design consultant would put out a specification, and it wasn't very well detailed. So the integrator didn't necessarily know what they were supposed to put in. So the price would go up with the lack of definition. And so then we changed the way we operate to try to plug the holes as much as we could so that there was a clear understanding on the part of the integrator. And we found that subsequently most of the bids came in with within 10% plus or minus of what our estimate, construction engineer's estimate was for the projects. But you can get a project that goes way out of control real fast if you don't give the integrator enough information to be able to adequately bid a job.
100%.
Let's talk a little bit about the money, right? We all need to make a living. And many of you are entrepreneurs and run relatively small organizations, so it makes it even tougher. You need to be even sharper. So I'm going to throw the panel a curve here because this question was not one of the formalized questions, and that is, it sounds great and sounds really like that there's some cooperation, potential cooperation, or there's existing cooperation, which actually it can work. We don't have to always beat each other's throats. But you still have to make a living. So how is that going to work? I mean, if with Jim's example, or your example, where the integrator is capable of doing a big part of the design build, and then you come in, I mean, how do you split the financial pie? Are there any type of rules built around this, or is it just a job by job? This is how it's going to work out for my company, and this is what you get because we're both designing it? I mean, it seems like a complicated challenge to me.
Yeah, I don't think either of us have any control over that process. It's really driven by the client and the construction manager. Most of the projects we're involved in are large enough that there's a construction manager who is representing the owner and the architect, and then there's a GC who's handling all of the installation for all disciplines. And so we always have this communication problem because we're a sub to the architect who's a sub to the CM, and the security installer is a sub generally to the electrical, but sometimes to the telecom guy, if not being the same integrator. And then they go up to the GC, and the GC and the CM work really, really hard to keep us from communicating with each other directly. So, you have the submittal process and you have the RFI process, and everything has to be fully documented. And we try to get a dialogue going under the radar with the installation contractors, and we'll work through what the problems are, and then we'll do the paperwork to go either way, so that we all stay well documented and we're not subverting their control, but we've already agreed on what the answer is to whatever the problem is.
Well, in the example that I gave with 7 World Trade Center, I wasn't looking for, a piece of the revenue or the income for the design side. I just wanted the collaboration to recognize that whatever I came up with, I didn't want them going, what? What is that? So because it did not exist, and I felt that I could really differentiate myself by, filling in that missing piece. All of us integrators are looking for, how do we differentiate ourselves by not just being a middleman to getting product to hanging it on the wall? Because, when that gets sanitized out, we have no purpose, we have no value. And the more and more, as we're seeing now with cyber and what have you, there's wisdom, there's certs, there's elements of what we know and how to drive these fancy cars now that, that we're selling that needs to be valued and memorialized and captured in the RFP documents for not only what you're building, but, what physicians are you using for this, high-tech brain surgery here? And, so I elected to do that. And it really, I did get a return on that. I achieved what I wanted to do with regards to building, the relationship with DVS. The end user was very appreciative, and it led to more, design, or not design build opportunities, but limited, limited number of integrators that they would consider for other projects. And again, they did not sanitize out those provisions, that DVS put in the spec as far as capabilities, credentials, or whatnot. They weren't steering the business to us. They were trying to protect the end user, and this is so key. When you write those things into your spec, the end user needs to know that they're there for their benefit. And again, the GC, put the cheese where you want the mice to go. The GC is incentivized to get that project up for this money or less, and then they're out. So it's no skin off them to throw these grenades off to the operations departments of their end user. If they're not aware of that, then that can happen. So I really think that's really what it comes down to is communications, between all of us stakeholders on the project and an end user that understands they have a role to play because they are the ones that have the cheese. They are the ones that can control whether the GC does what the GC does well or the GC has scope creep into making decisions that they have no business making because they don't have the end user's long-term interests, at heart. They're not incentivized to do that.
Yeah.
So I guess my comment along with his is like yesterday when Ed's his session was regarding Division 8, Division 28 for door hardware. When you get to the GC typically decides who gets what anyway. So a lot of the times our spec might cover our ass, right? But it might not cover our reputation. So when the GC goes out there and gives some security work to an integrator that maybe is an electrical engineer that doesn't have any business doing security design or security installation, and screws that whole thing up, it doesn't necessarily come back to us as liability, but it will come back to us as reputation. So.
A lot of it
my
comes
two
down
cents.
to, and I hate to keep bringing it back to being able to, make a fair profit, but that does what fuels a good business, right? It keeps you not only fed, but it lets you do new things like we were doing with this conference. But I don't know if the consultants realize how profitable the security integrators are. That's not your business to, I don't think, really to dig into that. It's mine. And one of the things that we do is look at a tremendous amount of data. Of course, we have this data because, we're a boutique bank. So we're giving integrators credit, and sometimes it's 7 figures. So if someone owes you $1 million or a few $1 million, you have their financial statements, right? So we take this data on an annual basis and put it together in a report. The report this year was 98 pages long, so we knew exactly. And I'm not bragging about our organization, but we are the best barometers as to how security integrators are doing, because we have small guys and medium guys and giant guys. And just so you consultants know, they from a financial viewpoint, they don't do very well. And that's just a fact. It's not an editorial on Bill's part. It's just a fact. The gold standard is and has been, since Jim and I got into business, the gold standard for a systems integrator is a 10% EBITDA. So ask me how many security integrators hit that gold standard. Very few.
Yeah.
Very few.
10. It's a typo, right?
10%.
Bill, what we do,
This is what the financial community, this is what the financial community wants to see. If they're going to loan you money, or even more important for entrepreneurs, if you're going to exit. So when I sold my company, I hit 10% because of the exit valuation. Now, what did I have to do to get there was kind of cruel, right? You cut. You don't invest in the future, but that's a whole nother story. So would you like to know, when you consolidate all these financials and you eliminate the companies, so the outliners we eliminate because it messes up the statistics. So the company that's got $2 million or $4 million of recurring revenue, you have to get rid of them, right? So any idea what the average margin is for a systems integrator? It's 3.6%. 3.6%. So that's what they're working on. And what's very unfortunate is they're still their worth is still based on an exit valuation based on their, whatever you want to call it, steady state free cash flow. There's a bunch of different names for it, right? So theoretically, you could be a very smart integrator and spend 30, 40 years developing a company that, quite frankly, isn't worth very much. I think what's going to change that is the whole, and I'm just following the smart money, right? I used to be interested in compression algorithms. Now it's all finance. But if you look where the smart money is going in security, it's the whole MSSP model, right? That's where they're interested in investing, and that may save the integrator from exiting. So they don't make a lot of money. So that's, I think, why they're contentious sometimes.
Yeah.
Projects.
Well, what we do find and what we do know is that when for every day that a project takes longer than it should have because of installation problems, the integrator's losing money.
Yeah.
And so we really try to work with the integrator where we can, and sometimes it's not under either of our control, but if it's a disaster if we don't have a cooperative installation contractor. But we're actually trying to help mitigate the problem and help them get done because we know that it's a money loser pretty quickly.
The good stats. I think installing companies, it's about $200K a head per year. So like a 25-man company could do about $5 million worth of work. So if you're looking at the side below, if they're making less than that, they're probably not making money. And if they're doing 220 a head, then they're probably making money. So if you're gauging, if you don't know an integrator, you don't know what size they are, and you got a project that you're consulting on, they've been hired, and they've truly got 6 guys, like, it's a $12 million project that needs to be delivered in 100 days or something. That's an indicator for you. The other thing we use are the NSC labor rates. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure how you guys calculate how long projects should take, but there's an industry standard that the National System Contractor Association publishes for AV and security, all that stuff. So we use those numbers in our calculations to bid with. So, so it's really fair. It's really known. These are the industry averages that everyone reports. There's another point I wanted to make. I'll rest for now.
Well, I'd say if it's a new facility, we typically don't have any say in how long you guys are able to be on the job. I believe in maybe a retrofit or a security-only job. We're pretty cognizant, I think, of approximately how long it'll take, and we usually will give a little bit of leeway, but it will all depend on the client and how quick they want it done. And so I think both of us are pretty much rushing to get a lot of that stuff done. But I'm with Lauren. We try to help you guys out as much as possible to stay on schedule and as much as possible. But there's integrators out there who will get last-minute RFIs, or they won't get their shop drawings in time. And usually you're not supposed to start on the job until your shop drawings are reviewed, but I've been with generals that'll just tell them to go for it anyway, and they'll have issues down the road.
Yeah, that's critical. It's called other trades. All right, what's the problem? Other trades. Right? Air conditioning vent goes right down the line where all the cameras are supposed to be installed or whatever. So yeah, that happens. Yeah.
Well, the key to keep the time down also is the quality of the people that we put on the project.
Yeah.
And they're not cheap. It is hard to get good project managers and good technicians, and to keep them. And it's much harder with the millennial, reality that, in the old days, you'd get some kids, out of college or a tech school, and you treat them right, you pay them well, and you educate them, and they would stay. They would stay. Now, the culture, you're fighting the culture that, in this generation, it's not just this industry, that they have to change jobs every 3 years, just because. Otherwise, they're a failure to their peers. And that is a real challenge to, to businesses now who want to make the investment. It puts even more pressure, and the way I look at it, on the consulting community putting these standards and these requirements, in the spec, because I need even more of a basis to argue, within my much larger company, now, why we need to continue making this investment, in spite of the fact that we have more flight risk. It's inevitable, with the talent. But if I can show that the industry is moving to these constitutions that are put out there for these RFPs that are defended, against, subjective interpretation or elimination, by the GCs and whatnot, so that qualified, integrators with the necessary certs and training and certification and experience and whatnot, are winning these projects, and we're not having to lower our number to compete with somebody that doesn't deserve to be at the table, then I think we have a chance to elevate, not only the quality, but the speed of the, it works better for us, the jobs get done quicker, you look better, the end user is happier, to be able to meet or exceed, those deadline requirements. So, when, in fact, one other, comment that I didn't add in the front end, when Bill was giving Ray the accolades here for this event, last year, PSA had our sales and marketing convention. I've made everyone for the last 25 years in Hawaii. And Ray says, I really need the voice of the integrator here at the, the consult event. And if, most of you guys are going to be out in Hawaii. I said, I'm in, because I knew that this is really the key to the future. I think for the integrators that that are working in that enterprise space as we are so often. And I figured I'd it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission from Bill. So I told him, I got to do this event.
Jim's really afraid of sharks.
But, it's really, there's a lot, I'm not the only one. There's a lot of integrators out there that, when we talk friend and foe, we understand we need to be an asset that you can leverage. And we need to have this relationship work, and we want to be better than the stereotype of, what integrators have been in the past. But it's, it's really it's a collective effort, and if you help us, I think you'll see a lot, respond to those requirements.
So to give you an example of a faux situation, and this was really triggered by the end user owner of this project, but we were working under the architect, and we did all the requirements, definition, and what have you, and did the package, and it went out to bid, and a national integrator won the bid, and but then the owner decided that they wanted to save money, so they didn't have us involved in the project meetings. We were just to come and do sign off later. So I get down to the project, and it's looking different. So I said to the integrator, where are the drawings? Oh, they're out in my truck. So he went out and he brought them in. And then I noticed he was using a different set of drawings. So I said, well, what are those? And he said, oh, well, we re-engineered the entire project. And so we installed it a different way. And they had upsold to the client and added lots of additional devices. And so it didn't even work the way that it was supposed to work. And at that point, there was nothing I could do. So, I just took a deep breath and looked at it from the standpoint of how it was installed and if it worked based upon their design, and let it go, because it would have cost millions if we had tried to enforce it, and I knew that we would not be successful. But it was really a disservice to the end user client in the end, and yet they were the party that was really, the guilty party was the end user. But the integrator knew that they were doing this on purpose, because when they did their submittals and as-bills, which they had done, they sent our drawings, even though that had nothing to do with the installation. So that's an example of a faux relationship. Needless to say, we haven't done any projects with that integrator since.
Wow. Guess not.
Yeah, that would be faux.
That's scary. Yeah.
So there's a concern, I think this has a big impact on the consulting community, and it has a big impact on our organization as well, and that is the smaller integrators and where they stand. What is their future? Do they even have one? Now, I will say this. Andrew and Christine Lanning are outliners, right? So I don't think consultants are very smart. They know, I think they know that. This is not a typical $10 million integrator.
So I just want to tell you, we started with a credit card because I thought that's all I needed, right? So 15 years later, I'm still about $1 million short of my first million, okay? Then I bought a building, so now I'm like $2 million short of my first million. So I don't know if I'm going up or down, but I'm having a good time, and I love the industry. I just wanted to say that. I have a great boss, by the way, who actually knows the money, which is important, my wife.
So I mean, and this is what's really, guys, driving consolidation a lot in the SI space, right? The guys are getting out because they, in some cases, feel they have to, right? Not because they want to, they have to. So my question to the consultants are, and this has a huge impact on my company. So we have several hundred integrators, but we have 171 equity partners, right? Government will let us go to 250, by the way, before they start meddling. Of those, quite a few are really small integrators. You know, $10 million, $8 million, $7 million, $12 million. I mean, can you guys, considering what Jim is talking about and considering Andrew's an outliner, how are they going to keep, can they afford these high-paid project managers? Can they afford all the cybersecurity certifications? Can they afford to do the things that they need to do? And are you guys going to just, I hate to say it, but not give them a chance, just eliminate them, simply because you're concerned that they may not be able to perform at the same level some giant company who has 150 engineers on their team? That's a big concern of ours, and we discuss it behind the scenes, and what we can do to help. But I'd really like to know your truthful thoughts on that.
Okay. Well, on our projects, we do require certification for the systems that are being installed. So from that standpoint, we might be slicing them out. However, the integrators often sub, and so I think that to Jim's description of the difficulty of getting workers, that if the larger integrators help these smaller integrators by hiring them to do installations where, they match their expertise, they'll be able to build up until they get sufficient certifications and be able to handle the projects on their own. Not everybody's going to have all the certifications, and you could have, 2 or 3 of these with the right certifications, and then you provide the project management. Those kinds of things I think would work.
And we're really encouraging the smaller integrators to team with the larger integrators for their own survival, really, in a lot of cases.
So we have the National Deployment Program at PSA, and so we in Hawaii specifically, because I don't have a lot of headquarters there other than military. So commercial work, the headquarters on the mainland, those large integrators that own that client, we do a lot of their small work. So we get a lot of that subcontracting work from Jim and from other, a lot of the top 10 PSA integrators from purchasing volume come our way. We also, from all the stats that we do, and I'm not sure if it's just because we're in Hawaii, but average training cost that companies spend 0.06% of revenue. We spend triple that on training. So 8 years in, we went back and looked at all the training we had invested. I used to hire a lot of exiting military folks because they were there, they were sharp, they could do the job, but they didn't stay in Hawaii because mostly family things. They would want to move back home to be close to family. After 8 years, we had spent $350,000 on training for people that didn't even work for us anymore. to give you an idea of what goes into these bodies, right? It's, from our perspective, it's $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a head that we're going to start spending a couple years in, not the first year they're with us, but pretty soon. And then you got to create a culture to keep them. The workforce development piece is massive. It's a good point, so the level of expertise should be looked at. You want to make sure they've got people that can do the work and then understand what that volume of work is. It might be very complex but very small, which doesn't take a big crew. It might be very simple but very large and it needs a big crew in there, and they're going to go get a bunch of subcontractors, and then quality has to be watched, things like that. So it's a mixed bag from an integrator's perspective. I would tell you, because I'm an entrepreneur, there's nothing I can't do. My wife's like, sit down and shut up. Let's read the spec
and
first.
then your competitors hire your people that you're just trained.
Yeah, for sure.
Follow up on it.
So Terry, we'll get right to you in 1 second, Jim. So Terry, tough question, got to tell the truth. These big utilities that your company does a lot of, huge. One of the jobs, I was talking to somebody at your firm, it's just huge. Be truthful, you've got Securitas, and you have G4S, pick another one.
Convergent.
And Convergent.
Yeah.
And
Tech systems.
you have Andrew's company, or a $10 million integrator that doesn't have the technical sophistication at Andrew's company. And they all walk in, and according to Security by Design's rules, they're certified. They're certified in Secure whatever. They're certified. They got all these certifications, and they've been in business for 20 years. Is it even playing field, or are you just going to go with one of those big guys?
That's a good question.
I know it's a tough question.
So with electric utilities, typically, we don't have a choice. They usually have pre-approved integrators that get these projects.
Oh, they're all big guys?
No. There's usually small guys, big guys. Now the small guys usually get bought up by the big guys, because I don't know how many integrators I've worked with in the past that Convergent has acquired. And so they go from a small guy to a big guy. But I'm currently working one out in Southern California, and they're a real good integrator. Their problem is they just get overwhelmed because they can't afford to ramp up, because then the project, budget concerns happens with electric utilities all the time, so they'll slow down some of it, so they can't afford to lay off. But they do have a big issue with the small integrators needing to ramp up right away, and then if project fails or they don't get the next project, something will happen. Now, what I like is the local smaller integrators to get the maintenance part of it, because they're usually local, they're usually around, their techs are usually there, where a lot of the larger integrators, their techs will move around sometimes to different regions depending on where the business is, and that's usually the build business, not the maintenance business. So, but what I will say about the previous topic with the smaller integrators is, I think their biggest concern, to me at least, is there's a lot of electrical contractors and telecom contractors now that see that revenue stream, and so they're starting to move that way, and a lot of the vendors are giving them, well, maybe not giving them, but they're getting a lot of that, their VAR business or whatever the vendor calls it, and so I see a lot of these guys taking over a lot of that business that the smaller integrators had, and in my opinion, in past experience, they're screwing up a lot of it too. So they're kind of making integrators look bad, even though they're really not integrators.
Yeah, there are two other factors that go into that. One is 8A. That's a dicey road for our clients, because some of them are not qualified. And the other thing is, even with the big integrators, we require that they're actually using the guys that have the certifications.
They actually use them?
No bait and switch, right?
So Jim, for publicly held companies, you've been in senior decision-making, capacity. As far as the consulting community is concerned, can you go in and say, I'm Securitas, or I'm whatever, I'm Stanley, and I've got so much depth and such a strong balance sheet that you need to use me. Is that a...
Nobody is everywhere. And even if you are in many places, you can't guarantee the same level of quality in those locations. I have been, since I've been on both sides, I've been a small company and a public company and a large company and a larger company. I am a firm believer that we, the big boys, have to be careful about over-harvesting, that there is a real value in the small to medium businesses in this industry where a lot of the very dynamic thinking and creative ideas and execution strategies have evolved from. As Andrew mentioned about National Deployment Program, the first thing when, that I was doing in HPE and then evangelized in Kratos and I'm now doing in Securitas is that, subcontracting locally is risky. Partnering with companies whose pedigree I know and have worked with these companies for 20, 30 years, whose reputations in their markets is critical. So when they are part of a program that we may be a prime on, I know that they have a much more compelling incentive to perform than, LDs in a contract. I think it is really critical that we recognize that, that not only do we have the incentive, or I try and drive that culture within our company, but again, the way the specifications are written, if that is leveraged, it may not be the prime because we may have to complement the local company with some of the CCIEs or whatever that they're not going to be able to carry, on their staff. But that local commitment, that local service capability, that skill set, within the market of the projects is extremely valuable. And again, it's not mutually exclusive, like I said, with design build. I think a hybrid approach for the very large programs, where you need the financial structure, of the prime, but you get the local participation. But again, that doesn't come at the lowest price on a competitive bid that just says who's got certifications in these 5 manufacturers, right? And who's going to take this project at this price? When you hybrid in, all of the other experience requirements, cyber, policies and procedures and what have you, we can look great on the top side, but if the worker bees out there in the field aren't disciplined, then part of that program, and there's some level of cost to that. But if that is carried, I think the end users, the GCs, that need to demonstrate to their shareholders that they're getting best value can put out RFPs and vet it, but they're vetting it to fair competition that's going to follow the constitution of the specification that carries, again, more than just, a list of systems and requirements and, architectural drawing.
Okay. So Ray changed his mind. No, we take a couple of questions, guys, and then wrap it up. Any questions for either the consultants or the integrators? Ben?
So, given the small ego pool of the consultants that y'all deal with, and we all are, what is the best framework from both the perspective from y'all on how do you address and set the framework for when either the consultants have made mistakes in what's provided from which the integrators work with, or the integrators bring in additional expertise that the consultant may not be aware of? And that will vary when you have as Lorna mentioned, you've got a client that wants to create a hostile environment versus as well as some that are supportive. But how do you address those problem sets without just saying, Jim, which you were right, was project management and communication? What else can everyone do to improve that?
Well, it's not a mistake, it's an opportunity.
That's right.
Let's change our thinking first of all, right? There's an opportunity there for some win. And that's what needs to be explored first, ultimately for the client. I think it was brought up a few times. It seems like the security guys of all the people are there a decade later, right? So we're really living with what gets done, and there to fix it and maintain it and support it. Where the GCs moved on, the big electricals moved on. A lot of those other guys move on. So we're the ones with ownership. So I think we're there. So opportunity. That's how I look at those.
Nobody's perfect. Manufacturers have products that have problems, right? Integrators have their shortcomings. Sometimes a consultant might miss something or not be aware, something, or time, but the key is communications, and never, ever, ever bring those grenades with the pin pulled into the construction meeting where you've got 30 people sitting there, and you're going to show off because, this, this is wrong, that's, no.
Yeah.
In fact, Brian, you might remember Steve calling you on the network where, we found something that was going to be, an outgrowth problem on one of the projects we were working on, and I said, here's how you handle that. You call, you talk to the consultant offline and say, look, this is what I'm seeing, what do you think, blah, blah, blah. You can get, 99% of the problems you're going to get through, but you've got to have that, you really have to have that collaboration, communication, between again, if the consultant is still engaged. If the consultant is dismissed off the project, now we are set up where the only way we can defend ourselves is to attack you. Because there's no way to communicate with you on the job. If you've been sanitized out, by the end user and the GC, and we're in these construction meetings and we got a problem, and it ties back to the design, and there's no means by which for you to contribute to that, either in an offline conversation or as part of the process, that's what begins, the real faux side of the whole situation, and it's not healthy for anybody. And in some cases, look, there's good and bad in every vertical, and some integrators, that's their business plan is to sanitize out the consultants, find ways that they can demonize themselves and step in and be the design builder. I think that's the wrong view. I think that long term we're going to see more and more. You guys are a key piece of most of the major infrastructure projects and large programs that we're going to see going forward, and that's a very myopic and a foolish view. So, I don't shy away from areas that I have opinions at times, but I do it, in a professional way, recognizing that in most cases, look at virtually everybody in this room is here because you get it, right? Yeah. It's the ones that aren't here, that are the problem. And I have a list of consultants that I wouldn't take a project if they were on it cash up front. Because I know that their MO is to turn the manufacturers and the integrators into the demons so that it's an annuity for them for forever, right? There are those out there like that. And, to whatever degree that the consulting community can self-police them, and when you're looking, end users that are not suspecting enough to look at the pedigree, when you look at a consultant, you're evaluating consultant, and every project for the last 20 years has ended up with them having to step in because the manufacturer lied and the integrator was no good. There's a common denominator there, So, I think we can, again, elevate the game. It's all about communications and respect, that this is a profession, not a trade, and I think that really is the key to, guideline for us going forward.
And I just want to add that this includes manufacturers. We have a current project, and the manufacturer, when the integrator went to order the product, called them and said, we've got this problem, we can't make this product work. So here are our other options. And the integrator called us and said, we just got this call. And so we worked together, and the other products from that manufacturer wouldn't work, so we found an alternate manufacturer. But we really appreciated the fact that the guy was brave enough to say, my product doesn't work. And that saved the reputation of all three of us.
Well, we're running over schedule. So before we thank our panelists, two quick things. One is, and I know our friends from Reed, who owns ISC, they're here, as our partners from SIA are also here. So our cyber consult meeting, which is during the summer in Dallas, I'm going to try and work something out with this great organization. I really think it's incredibly important for you guys to be involved. I'm not an expert in that technology, but I am an expert in where the smart money is going. And if you want to pick a place in security, that's where the big money is going. So if you want to follow the money, and keep your end users happy, and I know the consultants are going to be writing this into the specification, and I can't preach enough about how important this is. So Ray, I hope we can work something out. Would love to have you guys there. I think, you're part of this, an important part of this community. And in closing, I have the utmost respect for some of our integrators, and with these guys being at the top of the list, and Jim in particular, who I go back with over a quarter of a century with these projects. So I called Jim up and said, we need help. Wealthy customer, private estate, and we should design a perimeter system. And so this is what Jim designed. Yeah. Actually, I got
Very
this.
well done for what it is.
Actually, this is true. I got this slide from Security by Design. I can't believe it's true, but you tell me it's true, which is pretty awesome. So I figured you got to have a sense of humor, even if it's gates and locks. That's pretty darn funny. Thank you very much. You guys were great. Really appreciate it.
Good job, everybody.